Thank you so much. I'm excited to be here and to just talk about all of the lessons we've learned over the last 18 months or so, building out the AI gateway and talking to over 600 customers that are now using this in production. So yeah, let me quickly get started. So hey everybody, I'm Rohit. I've been building Portkey for the last 1.5 years. But before this, so this is my second startup. I actually built a video collaboration product in the 2012s. I sold that to Freshworks, and then I was leading platform engineering at Freshworks for a couple of years. I was the head of product for Freshdesk, which is a competitor to Salesforce and Zendesk. And I built a ton of support chatbots there. So this was on early versions of BERT, then GPT-2. And then just as GPT-3 was launching, I actually moved to a startup called Pepper, where I was building an AI-first content marketing platform, similar to Writer, Jasper, Copy AI. And at its peak, I think we had almost 250,000 users. And that was also the period where I had my, I think, best years learning about generative AI and putting it into production. I think those 2 years was, to quote an author, the best of times and the worst of times. So I really enjoyed working in Gen AI, but it was just extremely frustrating going to production because there was constantly some of the other problems going on with the system. So then Ayush and I, who were both building this platform at Pepper, we left off and decided that we wanted to build a production stack that allowed other companies to deploy Gen AI to production a lot more seamlessly. So with that, just a quick note about Portkey. Portkey is the production stack for Gen AI apps. We're deployed by over 600 teams. And till date, we've actually served over 640 billion tokens for some of the best enterprises and some of the best startups that are innovating with generative AI. So I think everything I talk about going forward will be from this experience of having seen billions of requests go through the gateway. And we'll try to talk about three core things, which is one, obviously, why do we need AI gateways? What is an AI gateway? How do you integrate this? And then what are the lessons learned? And we'll spend most of our time on what are our lessons around cost, around performance, accuracy, and then governance. So I'm going to get started, right? So what are AI gateways and what's all of the buzz? Gartner's mentioned this now, and a lot of companies are adopting it. So do you really need one? And why did we even build one? So we're finally at that stage where AI is at its accessible for all moment. And why I say this is because I've been in the previous era where it would take us easy 6 to 12 months to collect data, clean it up, train a model, build a pipeline, test it in production, get it to a 40% accuracy, and then be amazed by the 40% accuracy because, yeah, we could probably start automating a bunch of tasks for our customers. But then today, if you have to deploy an AI application, it just starts with a very simple thing. You make an API call, and you can do extremely complex tasks with a lot of ease. And even if you don't know how to make this API call, you have Cursor or Claude ready to help you out to make that call. But we still see, and this is a statistic by multiple different consulting companies now, 75 to 85% of projects still get stuck in this POC death valley. And what is this death valley is, this comes from a personal experience. When I was building my content marketing platform, we got this random review. So we were, people were praising us, etc. And then we got this 1-star review that just said, your AI doesn't work. And we had no idea who's this user, what didn't work. And there was this black box we were using and making API requests and coming back, and we had sort of no visibility into what's happening into our systems. There are newer models that get launched regularly, and people are constantly afraid of going to production because, is this the right time? Are we using the better model? Will it become better the next month? And will I have to rewrite everything that I'm doing? And it's not just operational risk, it's also a lot of business risk, where while this is a joke where somebody tried to buy a Chevy Tahoe for like $1, but we've also seen real business legal cases because of which people have fallen into this trap of fear, uncertainty, doubt about all of this framework, business processes, legal risks, etc. And that's why we're seeing these projects really get stuck in the POC stages. So to break it down, generally we start with something like this. You have an API call, your AI application looks great, your POC works. But then to go to production, you really need a lot of ops. Um, you need your prompt and context management systems. You need a logging system. There's some guardrails because you want reliability on your applications. You end up building a router, caching, an AI proxy. Then you still have to think about governance, team management, and all of this good stuff. And in the end, what happens is, while this was what you wanted to build, you ended up building a lot of this ops, which is where we came up with what we call the AI gateway pattern. And now this has become fairly popular, where your application can connect to an AI gateway. This gateway, in turn, can make requests to any of the LLM models, can connect to your private models, your custom models, etc. And then this gateway takes over the operational responsibilities of your application. So think about a unified API to request any model. How do I observe request responses that are moving through the AI gateway? How do I manage my safety, security, and accuracy with the use of guardrails? How do I manage my prompt templates and collaborate on these templates with my team? And then how do I set up the right security, compliance, and governance structures so that everybody in my team can use AI to its full potential without me having to worry about the legal ramifications, the business risks, the reputational risks, etc. So that's where the AI gateway comes in. So this is an open source platform. There are other AI gateways as well in the market, but the pattern is more or less the same. You have this private gateway deployed in your instance, and this then does a lot of stuff between your AI application and the different LLM providers that you have. Three key value adds for this. You have complete control and very granular visibility into what's really happening into your systems. So when somebody leaves you that one-star review, you know where to really go and look for and help them out. It leads to forward compatible deployments. Uh, in engineering, we've always heard of backward compatibility, but we feel forward compatibility is really as important. And then you get safe and accurate outputs. Um, you're building your own checklists, you define your own definition of accuracy, and you can all just build it into your own AI gateway of sorts. Cool. So then how do I build this out, and does it take too much to deploy? Typically, what you would do is, if you're using the Portkey AI gateway, you would just set it up by using npx. So I would just say Portkey AI gateway. That would set up a gateway and run it on your local machine. So the gateway is now up and running for you to connect. We also have a cloud-hosted version that you could use. But then now you could drop it into your code with just 2 lines of code. So you can say, my base URL is the Portkey gateway URL. I can put in some default headers, and I'm done. So with this, you get your full gateway deployment, and then you can go on and customize and add your operational stuff on the gateway, while your business logic and your AI application stays sanitized from all of this other madness that goes on around here. So that's how you set up the gateway. And then moving on to having deployed this for so many different customers, we've had a bunch of learnings, and I wanted to divide our learnings into 3 core buckets, which is going to be around cost, performance, and accuracy. And I almost like to think of these as tips that will help you go to production with confidence. Because a lot of times, even when we deploy newer prompts or we're upgrading AI models, we may not be completely sure of, is this good, or how do we even measure if you're doing good enough? I'm hoping some of these tips could help that we've seen work across a lot of the customers that we deployed for now. So I think let's start with cost, right? I think the biggest thing I have learned over the last couple of years is, I think when we're getting started, there's no need to worry about cost. A lot of people at the very beginning are like, oh, every API call is going to cost me. Is this going to become really expensive? Because while I have very predictable costs on my CPU resources, I'm not too sure about LLMs. But there's this really nice graph that was dropped by A16Z, I think yesterday or day before, where they said that the cost of using an LLM has dropped significantly. Like it's almost um, nearing like $2 for a year's worth of you talking for 10 hours every day, which is insane because now you can actually do a lot of compute for a very, very low cost. So this is not something that you worry about on a POC level or as you start scaling. I think costs are very, very manageable. As you start scaling is when I feel costs become something that you should start to focus on a little bit. I think it'll never be a worry, but what you want to do is start optimizing costs because they do start to balloon up really quickly, especially as you start making agentic calls. You have workflows that make multiple LLM calls. Costs can really start to add up very quickly. So as you scale, um, we've typically seen it very helpful to just start monitoring usage to begin with. So you can set up different limits for different applications or for different use cases of AI. And each limit, we've seen a lot of cases in which uh, some agent or some application went rogue or a user just DDoSed you. And while most DDoSes can be a little harmless, where your application is just unavailable for a little while, in this case, your LLM cost can immediately shoot up if you've not got the right limits in place. So setting up some rate limiting, some debouncing, and then monitoring usage on a regular basis can help you avoid a lot of the problems that come fairly soon. I think one example we remember is from a customer who saw that a very small cohort of the users was disproportionately affecting their LLM bill. And they realized that their LLM, so this set of customers was using Chinese characters in their application. And at that point in time, Chinese characters or Chinese words, those tokens were very expensive. So for 10% of the usage, their cost was almost 50, 60% of the total cost. And which is where they could identify it and really start to work on this and get it within control. So interesting, simple stuff. We should just do it. Second is caching responses. Again, almost a no-brainer. But in the LLM world, there's an interesting new technique called semantic caching that allows you to also cache similar responses and serve similar requests directly from a cache. So this makes use of the same vector embedding techniques. You can look for similar questions that have come in the past. You can set a really high threshold so you're not serving wrong responses. And then you can serve from semantic caches as well. We've had customers that gotten up to 60% cache hit rates because of semantic caching. And especially if you're doing code generation, etc., semantic caching can be extremely useful in those scenarios. And then thirdly, and I think we've almost gone from basic to intermediate to advanced, but I think there's a lot of value to be driven if you switch to domain-specific models. Generally, what we've seen with customers is you would start with a expensive yet broad-based model like a for Omni. And then as you break down your use cases, your prompts become better, your use cases are a lot more streamlined, you can switch to a much more domain-specific model. So this could be a Foro Mini with a really good prompt. It could be a Llama model that's fine-tuned to your specific use case. Could even be a combination of models that are so fast that you can actually make 2 requests and achieve the same response output. We've seen a lot of customers move from GPT-4o to 4o Mini, 4o to 3.5 Turbo, and it is extremely effective, both in terms of cost as well as latency. So that's around costs primarily. Moving on to performance, I feel this is the area where uh, we have a lot of experience. I think just because LLMs today are just extremely unreliable in performance. If you open and see any API provider's status graph, it's actually a bloodbath. We've not seen APIs that have been this unreliable. And that's because it's just the nature of how LLMs are deployed and managed. And as volume increases on any of these systems, they tend to be unreliable. This graph doesn't even show the full story because we've seen spikes in response times. We've seen random failures. We've seen unannounced rate limits. And all of this is done because everybody's trying to scale up resources. While this may not be the case forever, I think today it's definitely still a big problem, and it has been for the last 2 years or so. So how
I
do we
have a
set up?
question. I have a question about this, if you don't mind, Rohit.
Please.
Um, so can you give some stories or anecdotes of where you noticed these failures in production, or because 99.82 seems like a pretty high uptime. I mean, I know it's not 5 nines or whatever, but it
Yeah.
seems pretty good. But what has been your experience of when this happens and why?
Yeah. So I think this is from OpenAI, I think a couple of months back or something. But so if you actually calculate 99.82%, it's like more than 4 5 hours of downtime in a month. So it's pretty significant if you start to look at it. I don't know if it's exactly 4 5 hours or 1 2 hours, but it starts to get significant. That's one. And secondly, we've seen it quite a bit, especially with, uh, say, Azure OpenAI, where your response times after a certain request limit can just start to go up significantly. So you're making your calls, your average response time is, say, 1500 milliseconds. And then after a certain, continuous API requests, that response times will start to climb up to as high as 15,000 milliseconds, which then becomes a problem because you don't know, why is Azure rate limiting you? Or are they queuing your requests? Is it just because you've made too many requests, etc.? And we don't have too much, variance on why this is happening. Even the headers that get returned from multiple LLM providers, you don't get the right rate limiting parameters over there, because internally under the hood, there's always something or the other going on. Yeah,
Okay, got it. Yeah, thank you.
no worries. Yep. So yeah, this generally, I think, unreliability, and I think this is on two levels. One is definitely uptime, and is the API even available? And the second is in latency. So LLMs can go up and down in terms of how fast they are. And at Portkey, we do monitor them quite a bit, and we understand that they go through spikes and troughs on different times of the day, on different days of the week, on seasonal changes as well. So it's very interesting to see how response times actually vary with what's happening in the physical world as well. So how do we tackle it? I think the basic is just timeouts, retries, load balancing, and fallbacks are a must. For example, I think with Azure, we always recommend creating multiple Azure regions where you have different limits and be able to load balance between those regions, especially as your traffic is starting to increase. What happens over time is Azure increases your reputation and you can get higher rate limits when you talk to your account management team. But before that, it's always good to set up load balancing. I think similar for if you're using Anthropic directly or if you're using Bedrock models as well. Load balancing and fallbacks are just a must. Because of these, people have like gone through downtimes with a breeze. They've not even realized downtimes because you have your fallback model set up that are being able to serve requests, or fallback regions set up that can just continue to work and keep your application not so tightly coupled with one LLM API. Timeouts, again, if you're seeing random spikes of response times, it's usually a very simple way to time out the request after a certain period of time and have the gateway fall back to another model or so. Secondly, I think this is a little underrated, but especially if you're streaming responses, it can be a really good idea to route to your nearest LLM. So if you have users in Europe, you can actually route them to the Europe models. And if they're in North America, route them to North America. If they're Southeast Asia, then Singapore might be the best place to route your requests to. This is also becoming a very important point from a compliance perspective. So while this decreases latency significantly, we've seen drops of up to 300 milliseconds that are spent in the round trip. For compliance purposes, especially with the EU AI Act coming into play, this just becomes extremely important. So it's very interesting. We've played around with Cloudflare workers and seeing that can there be edge AI models that run on the workers platform. I don't think it's very performant yet, but it's a really cool idea that you could have models running on 300 data centers across the world, and then your request always lands up at the nearest, fastest resources that are available to you. And then thirdly, we've seen a lot of times you could actually improve perceived latency through the use of streaming and UI hints. This is the biggest gain you can have if you have certain UI hints coming up. And I always like to give the example of O1 Preview, where in ChatGPT, as O1 Preview is thinking through the different steps, they're summarizing those steps and giving you a peek into what the LLM is actually doing. So while this has nothing to do with infrastructure or the way you're setting things up, you can improve perceived latency quite a bit because your users are spending time reading through the content or just going through the different steps, and they have a lot more patience as well. All of this becomes a lot more important when you're going through agentic workflows, because there is where there's a lot of performance visibility that you need. We've actually covered a lot of this in a blog we wrote around implementing Frugal GPT. This was a brilliant paper on how can you reduce LLM costs while improving performance. So if you're looking to deep dive into some advanced techniques, then I think this is something you should definitely check out. And then finally, coming to accuracy, I think the one thing I want to say is let's just not be deterred by hallucinations, because ChatGPT and Claude have made hallucinations a lot more normal. So while 3 years back, people were just turned off by hallucinations, today they understand that AI can hallucinate, and we should recheck it, and we shouldn't trust it completely, etc. So this is an interesting chart I found yesterday where 73% of the people have been misled by an AI hallucination before, which is interesting. So how do you manage accuracy is one, while developing, evals. So set up a golden data set, make sure that when you're switching models or when you're switching prompts, you're not regressing, and keep adding to those golden data sets as you see more information flowing through your logs. We really like Promptfoo to do this. It's on the command line, works very easily. I can set this up, configure it, etc. So it's an interesting tool for evals. And then in production, you could actually turn around and use those same evaluations, a lot of them at least, in production through AI guardrails. So the 3 different kind of guardrails that we recommend customers set up. There's one for safety, example is moderations. The second is for security, so that you're redacting any sensitive data that's in your input so that it doesn't go out of your systems. And then the third is accuracy. And these are the 4 core metrics you've seen almost everybody implement in some form or fashion. So you want to see if your answer is relevant to the question asked, if it's complete, if it was helpful, and it couldn't be polite, it wasn't biased, etc. And then was it truthful? How much grounding was it based on the context that you gave? I think this is again becoming important because compliance and regulation is also getting very tight. The EU AI Act is actually going live in February of next year. So a lot of companies are really moving towards setting up a lot of these safety security measures in place as well. So yeah, I feel to close out, it's almost like a shortcut that you can get cost efficiency, performance, and accuracy implementing the AI gateway pattern. And we see that happening almost on a daily basis. So yeah, I hope these learnings were a little bit useful to you folks, and I'm happy to take more questions.
Well, let's thank Rohit for a wonderful presentation. Let's do Q&A. So if you got questions, feel free to drop them in the chat or raise your hand and you can ask your question. So I guess while the wheels are turning, I'll go ahead and throw one out. So a lot of these things you're talking about, like cost, performance, and then like security, compliance, things like that. I feel like there has to be, there's like a point at which this stuff becomes like really critical. Because like when you're in the early days, you're just like trying to figure out product market fit, or maybe you're just trying to throw out ideas and figure out, is this project even useful to anyone, let alone finding product market fit? It's probably not super important to stress about like cost and performance and these other things.
Yeah.
But at what point, like, do you have any heuristics? Because doing this for multiple like production systems, do you have any like heuristics or frameworks that you use to say, okay, this is when we should start worrying about cost, or this is when we should start worrying about performance? I don't know, any musings on that?
Yeah, 100%. So I think so generally this phases after PMF is when you should definitely care about all three, because you're probably not going to be interacting with all of your customers one-on-one, and your users might just be out there in the wild and you don't have any clue of what problems they might be facing or what they might be doing with their application. So I think that's definitely there. But generally heuristics are, I mean, when you see costs above, say, about $100, and we see almost all of this happening together. So costs going above $100 a month, this is approximately the time that you're probably doing more than 10,000 requests a month, including like deep chat completion calls. There's some RAG involved in it, etc. And then for accuracy, I would say evaluations from the get-go is important, because otherwise you just have no clue about if prompts are good or not. But then guardrails becomes really important post PMF, because that will almost be the first question that serious customers start to ask you, saying, how does this comply with local laws? Can I use this in production? Is this safe? And for all of those questions, just having some guardrails to begin with just becomes important.
No, that's super helpful. I like how you have a specific number, like $100 per month, because like that's really easy to implement. You just look at your your usage costs. Any other questions? Feel free to drop them in the chat or just jump off mute. I've also got another one. If people aren't jumping to questions, this semantic caching idea is super interesting, but I imagine that it might be hard to get real gains out of it if you don't have like a huge user base. Like I imagine ChatGPT, like they probably saved a significant portion because they have so many users. Is there also like a scale you feel like semantic caching is also like helpful?
Yeah. So I would say there's certain use cases in which semantic caching can be extremely helpful. It's most helpful when you're doing Q&A on a closed data set. For example, you're building an internal chatbot for your company policies. So, this is your FinOps chatbot or your HR chatbot, 100% useful, because your top 100 questions are always the same, asked in different ways. So what's our leave policy like? Hey, when can I take a leave? How many leaves do we have in a year? And all of these are pointing to the exact same answer. And semantic cache actually is able to understand that context really well. The other place I've seen this perform really well is when you're doing anything with code. A lot of times what happens is developers would write the same code different ways, or they're just doing code completions. And in all of those cases, it just becomes super easy to just have some caching setup built in. So I would say for Q&A, and especially closed knowledge-based Q&A, it can be immensely useful because you're getting answers really quickly. I think the bigger risk we've seen in that case is how do you prevent cache leakage? So if I ask how many leaves do I have remaining, that shouldn't get cached. So those are like interesting things to worry about when you're implementing semantic cache.
Okay, so it's more a function of the use case as opposed to the scale. So like the scale, of course, will play a role, but if you're working on a closed system or the coding task, that's a good example as well.
Yep.
All right. Basil, did you have a question? You seem like you're about to say something.
Yeah, I'm moving around a little bit, but thank you, Rohit. So yeah, this is awesome. So you created this observability platform. You've got clients. You're serving their Gen AI applications. You're learning. What do you see as sort of the future, like the short term and medium term future of this LLM technology? Like, do you see more growth, or do you think there's a plateau? Where are we at?
I think we're finally in that trough of realization, as Gartner likes to call it, that people are now starting to realize that some of the POCs have gone very successful and some of the POCs have just not performed that well. So some people are like, okay, this is not useful. We're going to go back to classical ML or we're going to do something else. But I feel for the use cases, it's worked out very well. It's driven productivity up quite a bit. So I'm sure next year we're going to hear a lot more about AI automating a lot more tasks. We being able to interact with computer systems in a lot more naturally. I feel voice is going to be a big thing in 2025. It was big in this year, but I feel voice becoming a lot bigger next year. And we're going to see a lot more voice models coming out, which allow us to talk naturally to code, probably to Salesforce, and systems are doing a lot of work for us automatically. So I think the core technology has always been very powerful. It's just about how quickly are people able to build uh, projects and software on top of this that is able to extract that value from that LLMs. But I mean, I'm super bullish on it, which might also be a biased opinion now that I think about it.
Awesome. That's cool. So you've deployed a lot of, I know one example you gave was a chatbot, right? The customer service chatbot. What are some other sorts of use cases you've built or you're seeing built?
Yeah. So another interesting use case is a lot of people might have used Postman. And Postman really built out their AI copilot. And it was probably one of the first agentic workflows to go live, where it could look at your entire Postman account and start to offer help around, hey, may I write docs for this API? Can I help you with this error request you received? And that was a really interesting use case because they're combining a lot of the data that they already have within Postman documentation, and they're bringing it in context and live view. So this is, I think, going a little beyond help and support, but more about let me help you do your work a lot faster when you're within Postman. So I think that was a very interesting use case, and they scaled it up to almost, I think they're serving that Copilot to almost 30 million developers today.
Postman Copilot. I did not know about that. Yeah.
Yep.
Interesting. Very cool.
Yes, the favorite agent framework is.
What agent framework is Postman using, by the way?
They built their own.
Does he like Crew AI or LangChain better?
Do you have an opinion on my roommates asking some questions too?
Sure.
He said, do you have an opinion on Crew AI or LangChain or anything or AutoGen?
So I think those are the three more popular ones that we see. So it's either LangGraph. So I think most people who are building on LangChain have really moved to LangGraph because it's got some really neat capabilities and a UI where you can see those nodes, etc. Crew AI is probably the simplest to get started because of its abstractions being really neat and clean. So you can build your crew, get started. AutoGen was, I think, among the first ones to come about. So Microsoft users and people who are in that ecosystem do use it. But I would say most popular that we've seen is Crew AI. Most in production is LangGraph, but we're still to see a lot of AI agents in production yet.
Cool. Yeah, we're using LangGraph Studio Cloud right now, but it's good to know that you guys like that one too.
Oh yeah, yes. I'm actually looking forward to Bedrock quite a bit because Bedrock agents might also be really interesting. So they're pushing that in a really big way. So it'll be interesting to see how that happens.
So what is your company's roadmap for the next 6 months or a year? Are you building new products or you're just doubling down on your existing products? What's sort of the roadmap?
I think for us, it's going to be primarily three areas, right? We're definitely doubling down on observability on the gateway piece. The two other big areas, which might be newer areas for us to explore, would be one is obviously agentic workflows. How do we support them a lot more? Observability becomes a lot more important in agentic workflows, etc. And then second would be this entire realm of fine-tuning and small language models. So, or more so domain-specific models. So if I run a content company, can I build individual models that perform a lot better for each one of my customers? I think that's going to become a lot more popular next year because as real gains from these regular sized LLMs start to go down, you would want to augment them with personal data or from business data, so that you can serve it almost like a moat against other companies, saying, I have your data, I can build a really good model for you, and this model will outperform everything else that you have. So I would say fine-tuning hasn't really caught up this year so much. We saw very few companies use fine-tuning really in production. Next year is where I think everybody I talk to I think there's a lot of interest in seeing where fine-tuning can take them forward.
Does your platform offer distillation?
Not directly. What we do is, because we have all of this log information, you can actually select, filter these logs, and autonomously fine-tune your models. So that is a form of distillation, but it's not the technical distillation that OpenAI offers as well.
Yeah, I love all the great questions. Ty, I see you brought your video on. Do you have a question?
Yeah, sure. We're actually working on domain-specific models in the construction industry, and we're moving towards making it more agentic, but it's definitely going to need computer use behind it. We're working with Llama 3, waiting for Llama 4 to come out. Wondering what do you think is going to actually be produced in the next year, and where you think that's going to go?
I think in terms of fine-tune or domain-specific models, there are already like a ton of really good models that you can fine-tune for your use cases and make them work really well. If you're looking for completely open source models, then yes, I think we're still all waiting for the next version of Llama models. But I've heard very good stuff about the 3.2 models. So I have personally not done any fine-tunes on them till now, but I plan to do a lot more fine-tuning on the 3.2 models. I'm also very excited about the Claude Haiku fine-tuning that just got launched about a month back, because Haiku itself is a really good model, and fine-tuning Haiku could get like some really good results from whatever I've seen across the internet. So that's what I would say. So if you're doing something, I'd love to know the results as well. But Llama 3.2 and Haiku would be like my top picks to fine-tune smaller models.
Got it. Appreciate it.
All right. Well, any last questions? We went a couple minutes over, but I really enjoyed the discussion. We had really good questions. But if there's any more, happy to squeeze them in.
Rohit, I took a screenshot of your opening slide. Is it cool if I post that on LinkedIn, say I attended this talk?
Sure, please.
All right, thank you.
Yeah, be sure to tag Portkey and the data entrepreneurs. Yeah.
Of course.
Okay. Well, thank you guys for joining. Thanks for all the great questions. Rohit, thanks for the amazing presentations. The recording will be shared on YouTube. And then we also have an event next week where Paul is going to be sharing his insights for building LLM systems all the way from theory to production. So if you enjoyed this talk, I'm sure you'll enjoy that talk as well. So with that, thanks, guys. We'll see you in the next one. Take care.